Um, Welcome back from lunch. I'm going to try to rally myself after that delicious food. But today, I figure we talk a little bit about everybody's favorite blessing and curse, technology, and in history education. I know that there's volumes worth that you could write on this and talk about for days and days and days. So my approach to today was not to sit here and lecture you about pedagogy or lecture you about 30,000 tools that you can do. Instead, I figured we'd do a little bit of both and have more of, as one person put it, a buffet style, where I'm going to cover just a bunch of different things. And some of the stuff may be applicable to you. Some of it you may say, that's not my bag, and you move on. But hopefully you can walk away at least with a good tray full of stuff. And the rest of it is just there to kind of help give you some fodder to think about different ways that you might be able to even take little bits and pieces and incorporate it into your practice. So with that, I am John Gieger. I forgot to introduce myself because I started wandering. I am up in Chicago at DePaul University, and I work running the Center for Educational Technology there. These days, that means a whole lot of different things. Recently, it means putting out some fires for getting fall courses started with faculty. You can, sympathize with that. But it also means working with staff and students, especially who are still in the classroom or going into the classroom. And I have in the past worked with the Library of Congress, and I ran an archives department at a museum, and also I've dabbled here and there. The other thing, I was just talking to somebody about a project that I had just worked on, and so if you're interested in this, feel free to talk to me afterward. We used old radio shows from, we'll say 30s to the 50s or so, and the idea was to take radio programming from back then and use it as a springboard for students to learn how to do podcasting. So there's one freebie for you immediately that wasn't in my notes. And I won't cover that here, but if you feel like that's something you might be interested in, I definitely have some resources on that. All right, so with that, I'll get started with everybody's favorite cool little fun tool, Kahoot. I'm going to make you come back at least from lunch and shake yourself off here. If everybody in here used it, have people not? Raise your hand if you've used Kahoot. Yeah, all right. So then this is going to be an exercise more in the content of the Kahoot and to make you all talk to each other. So get yourselves into some semblance of a group, either your neighbor, if you're feeling moderately antisocial, or if you want to form up a nice cluster amongst yourselves. Since you all know where to go to kahoot.it, and I will pull up the code. If you have a computer, awesome. If you have a phone, go for that too. And I'm going to hope that it's not excruciatingly loud. All right, we'll get into our teams here. So everyone kind of knows Kahoot in here, but obviously there are a lot of different ways that you can use polling and quizzing in the class and out of the class, so we'll talk about that part afterward. But for now, go ahead and form up some teams. Go to kahoot.it and type in that pin, and I'll wait, 10 seconds or so for you to come up with a team name. It's only about 6 questions or so don't worry. This isn't going to go on some permanent record. Let's see. So there's 4, 5. Is that everybody? We still waiting on some folks? 6? Is everybody in a group, ready to go? There we go. That seems about right. Uh-oh. We're cut off. I'm going to try to make this a little bigger there. There we go. Okay. Everyone have their History Kids is in there twice. One capital K, one not capital K. We good? Everyone ready? Okay.
Do we enter our team name if you're not the one who typed it in?
Do you answer your team name? Oh, enter it? No, just the one person who's doing it on their phone. There we go. So, all right. So your first question, just to get you in the mood here, when was the first iPhone released? And if you don't remember, you get a quick burn off at the beginning, and then now it's timing. Got 5 folks in. All right. If you all remember from the other day, with the monumental addition to Apple's quest to make us buy more stuff, they released a 10th anniversary, in a way, iPhone. And so now that we're all tethered, we might as well know June of 2007 is when that came out. And the next one, oh, all right. So we've got the students. I like that. Nice job. They're in the lead. Okay, so now we go dive into the content. When was the first YouTube video uploaded? I know it feels probably a lot longer ago than any of these dates. It was actually 2005. Does anybody remember what the video was? No? It was a guy's trip to the zoo. Go on and you can look it up. It's still posted on YouTube. And it is him I think he's standing in front of one of the animal cages for a majority of it. But it's a real short clip of this guy's trip to, I think it's San Diego Zoo? Yep. So it's not enthralling. And it reminds me often of the actuality films that like Edison did, where it's nothing exciting, it's just showing you the platform. However, that was much longer ago than 12 years ago. Okay, that puts the winners in the winner slot, and our students still holding it at number 2. Okay, dive back into some history now for the history buffs. First school to use motion pictures was in what year, Rochester, New York? I'll give you a nice little spread here. This is in class for a class lesson, you know. Yeah, it was 1910. So yeah, you can go online and you can read about this. New York is known for a couple of firsts in their public school tech history. But I don't remember what it was off the top of my head, but it was part of just a quick little supplement to a curriculum. And that's kind of still how we think about it these days, or at least unless you're just showing a film in class to burn off time, I assume. All right, so 1910 puts us with the winners, still holding strong. All right. So now we go across in New York to Heron High School. They used what technology to teach a class as a first? And I gave you a couple of different choices here. See, this one's got more people thinking. High five. It was radio. So I know we think a lot about educational technology. We think of the one-to-one classroom. We think of all this modern bells and whistles stuff. But even in 1923, there was a class first using radio to teach accounting to students. So it has been a thing that we've tinkered with for a long time. And hopefully, even beginning with this, you're starting to realize ed tech is a fuzzy term that slides way back. I made up all the other ones, though the overhead projectors were first brought in into classrooms in, I think, the late 50s, early 60s. 16 millimeter projectors were used, they were invented for that in 1923, so I made that one up. And then the dictaphone was invented in 1888, so clearly was not used in classrooms. The winners. Slim lead now over history kids and the students. Come back to the present. When was the smartboard introduced? You know this one? Do you remember when the smartboard crept into your classrooms? Have you always been playing with a smartboard? No one. Yeah, it was 1991. I kind of did a double take on that one as well. Widespread adoption didn't start until a little later, but it started creeping in the early 90s. Some of you probably think of them as mounted to the wall, but if you remember the early implementation, they were on carts, and you like wheeled it in, and it broke half the time. And nowadays, yeah, nowadays you spend less time fidgeting with it than you did back then. All right. I think this is my last real one. University of London did what first for education in 1858? Just take a guess at it. Again, all tech that we use, but distance learning. It was a real thing that they pioneered back in the 1850s. You could get a degree from them back then. And also, it wasn't University of London, but England in general implemented, by the time television especially was being widespread, introduced about 100 years later, that you could remote earn your degree through video classes. So that's even been something that has been around probably a lot longer than you realize. All right, so now a fun one. This one has no wrong answer. What do you think out of these four that I picked of just big ideas is going to be another big thing in educational technology? And we'll talk about most of these too. Well, one of them we won't. But. This one's just for fun. All right. So most people seem to see AR and VR. I would agree that has a pretty strong sway. Coming back full circle to the iPhone release just recently, talking about how that's integrated now into the devices. And from the university level especially, I talk to faculty that they want to moan and groan over this stuff. And I said, look, you all know, especially your students are learning this early and it's following them through. So whether or not you think you can fight it, they learn it and it comes with them and it becomes a part of their life. And now it's even closer. It's on them all the time. I don't have to buy a $5,000 headset to do some of this stuff. MOOCs, still around, not dead. Same as competency-based education. And micro-credentialing and badging actually has been making an uptick as well. So if you're interested in any of those, we can talk about them later. So our winners are the winners, actually. Kudos to you guys. Students and history kids, very close. So again, everybody loves a good little Kahoot poll to get you thinking, get you at least off of the barbecue and deliciousness. And also the purpose of that was with the content of it, talking about educational technology. You know, we like to think about the augmented reality. We like to think about the smart boards. We like to think about iPhones. But it's been a term that we've been using for a long time. And technology doesn't have to be digital to be educational technology as well. So in this instance, I'm going to put up a nice little picture here of our last iPhone release. And you can see that, well, I kind of feel like him now. I got this big space to walk around. I don't look that cool, though. But in this circumstance, we're looking at the item. We're looking at the actual piece of technology, and we're saying it's got this pixel count. It's got this camera, which now actually we're thinking about cameras have been on our cell phones for God only knows how many years. But there's a good quote that I was reminded of that says, the best camera is the one that you have on you. So thinking about the technology and the things that you have in your classroom especially, using the stuff that you have effectively is better than trying to get that fancy new thing that you might only use one time. Or, you know, we want to spend the money that we may or may not realistically have on things for our classroom. We come up with these great lesson plans around them, but if it hinges on a device that you can't get or that you're gonna really struggle with, and we'll talk about sharing with other teachers as well, you know, find other ways to maybe broaden that. I can still take a picture on my cell phone without all that stuff, and it comes out perfectly fine. The purpose may be to capture that moment for myself. The purpose may be to share it with someone else. Quality. Ooh, I'm back. So, and also remembering then, tied to this, tech is a tool, it's not a destination. So is the device dictating how you use it, or are you still keeping open your horizon to saying this fits into something else? And we'll talk about design in just a few, kind of get over this pedagogy ideology part first. You need to remember, though, you know, to be deliberate in your choices, to make sure that, you know, you're not just, I talked about buffet for this. You're not just cramming all sorts of tech inside of your lesson and saying, yeah, that's going to be great. They're going to play with that. They're going to do this activity. And then you get to the end and you realize that they've basically been learning the things as opposed to actually getting something out of the content. So moving on, there was a great article a while back that it was called The Learning Machines. And it was talking about, I think, 20th century educational technology, but it struck me especially as how we view our students as well and how we view the devices. Are the tools that we're using the learning machines, or are we turning the students into the learning machines where they're simply just using these things to an end and then they move on? Why am I using an overhead projector? Why am I using a chalkboard? That was cutting edge technology in the classroom back then. You know, I could have it up on the wall. There's, you know, the silly little solar-powered calculators. Remember, you know, to have a classroom set of that. The pencil, think of that as classroom tech, as educational technology. It's something different. It's something that helps you, you know, I'm not going to say play with your pencil for a while. No, you're using it. And of course, you know, the popcorn machine of Scantron and audio and things like that. These are all learning machines, not our students. So the other side that I try to always think of, and it's kind of the engineer in me, says, why should I care? What's the point of this? We talk about teaching to the test a lot. Okay, we talk about, during previous conversation with Dr. Brown, about beyond high school. So what skills are these educational technology interactions teaching students about how to use them in the future, not just learning, now I know how to use an overhead projector, maybe back in the day. You know, I could bring in a nice special software suite for my students to use and give them no time to really do much with it, but spend 2 class periods teaching them about the how. But if they're never going to use this again, or if they don't understand the implication of what this is supposed to help them do, you've lost it. And you've robbed yourself of some really good opportunities to then not reteach it to them later on down the road when they forget, because you know they're going to forget. We all do. So actually, I'm going to kind of sideswipe here. What would you do? I write if Google went down. I did this with some teachers way back at a professional development that I hosted, and a bunch of them all stared at each other like it was news that we were all going to die. You know, like it was just, what do you mean Google would be down? How do I do this? And I said, okay, and maybe we'll try this real quick. let's say that you need to find out when, I'm from Chicago, so when the Hull House was established. But I said, Google services are down right now. I said, and that being just general internet searches. You can't do that. Let's say you're using devices that, how would you go about today getting the answer to that? And now I'll actually ask you, how would you go about and find out when the Hull House was founded if you couldn't just go online and look it up? Okay, yeah, so secondary, tertiary resources in our classrooms or maybe in your home. What else?
File cabinet of paperwork.
Yep. Others? Do what?
Go to the library.
Yeah, go to the library. I'm sure most of, if you have a librarian still, I know that's a sad thought, but you could go down to the library and look up there. What else? Yeah.
You get a phone book and you call the whole house.
You could actually pull out one of those silly yellow page books that they keep stacking in front of your door, and if you're in Chicago. And then anybody just know someone that would probably know it? Like a content expert, one of your friends, you know Jerry, who seems to know everything, and you just kind of ask him. So utilizing these networks that we have, ironically, half of the time you'd probably still be using technology along the way. But remembering that it's the why, it's that long-term stretch. And especially the last part about going to other expert authorities and seeking those out, remembering those practices too, because it's really easy, especially, and we talk about credibility in just a little while, it's really easy to pull out your device, quickly type it in. Google says, oh, it was founded in 1889. And you say, okay, and who of us would actually check that? If we were just at a pub trivia or something, cheating at that point. But you know, it's teaching students the same practices. Then we all fight Wikipedia, you know, and the adage is it's a great place to start your research. It's a terrible place to end your research. You know, the footnotes, things like that lead you off into these other parts of the digital sphere beyond typing the question into the search field. So in this case, we will talk just real quick about some design and kind of when tech is appropriate to insert into your planning. And you know, I love tech. I love playing with it, except for this thing. I don't really like this. But at the same time, I'll be the first guy to say, if you don't need to use it, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So there are times and there are places, but a lot of these activities, especially, you can find analog alternatives. We'll talk about that as well. But so finding good opportunities as opposed to just a cornucopia opening up the fire hose on students. So we all know backwards design. Everyone, yeah, some people more freshly than others, I'm sure. We know that we need to first think about the results in mind, and that's kind of where I start with the why should I care? What am I trying to accomplish here, especially when I'm inserting technology into the classroom? Am I actually trying to do something with this, or do I just want to show it to my students? If I just want to show it to them, then I can just do that and move on. I don't need to make an excuse for myself to feel better at the end of the day. So I kind of like this one because it put little wedges in there accidentally, but that's kind of, think about along the stream here, where you're inserting things. Or are you actually replacing whole steps of your design process with a piece of technology? So how much are you carving up for something, and how much are you just using it to supplement? So thinking about not tech word design, as I've heard some people say, and we all know as well with designing for learning objectives, especially we have to do these kind of to the standards, to the goals, to this and that, that Bloom's taxonomy is great and fine, but there's actually out there now, people have gotten so irritated with it that they've updated it for the 21st century. And you can find Bloom's 21st century taxonomy. So now verbs can include, media clipping and exemplifying and hacking and attributing and things like that, that you don't have to really make up as many excuses as to, not everything is, implementing. You can find other verbs in there. But they still need to follow along then kind of your higher order, lower order thinking spectrum. So taking that load off of you to justify the use of your technology as a one-shot thing. Find little ways to pepper it about and keep in mind the why. I'm going to actually go back to, that's one other thing I will mention is time, and not in the sense of like right now, but we all know that just like money is precious, time is precious, and so you can come up with these grand ideas, but time is a luxury. So also remember how much you're giving away to this technology along the way. A lot of times, though, you're going to inadvertently be using the technology when you don't think you're using it. And we'll talk about accessing primary sources. A lot of times, you're taking advantage of that stuff, and you're doing it almost under the surface. And you can check it off your list if it's a mental task. But you can also use those opportunities to expand and explain to students what's going on. Then you have the opposite, which is attention time. So you'll also realize that, okay, I've had students here in the classroom, and we've been watching something, and now, oh God, they're losing focus, and I've lost them. Or they look glazed, and you know that look. So remembering as well that you might find some of this stuff interesting, or these tools and these opportunities, but studies have shown that, you get a couple minutes out. I mean, how many of you guys already watch YouTube videos or something, and you're kind of looking at the progress bar on the bottom to see how far along you are? It's even creeping into the back. I've challenged people to do this. Watch a 5-minute YouTube video without touching it so that you don't see the progress bar, and see how fidgety and antsy you might get toward about the 4-minute mark. And that goes along with your students. So if you're putting, especially with flipped classroom model, if you're designing stuff for students that they're going to be doing at home, remember, you can't expect them, just like an adult, to sit down and watch a 30-minute video clip without maybe starting to get fidgety after minute 5. Break it up. Do smaller sections. That also takes the onus off of you when you're creating this stuff, if you're doing especially a talking head thing. And some of you may love recording yourselves doing different things. If so, more power to you. I personally hate doing that to myself. And in that case, you just have to cover that much time now instead of that much. So you can, mess up, re-record that little 5-minute chunk 20 times, as opposed to, I got so close to the end and I'm really bad at video editing and I have to do this whole thing all over again. So attention cuts both ways. Now these are fancy. I'm going to also partake in my crippling coffee addiction. Instructional design is another thing that I deal with, and these are just fancy diagrams. If you're interested in this as well, I'm happy to talk about it. And the one on the right side, Fink's little castle top, as he calls it, you guys have probably seen that one many, many times. That's especially with flipped classrooms. And when you're planning, sometimes think about, okay, what am I doing in class? What am I doing out of class for content? But also, what tech, what devices, what resources? Am I front-loading that now they've done the first 3 in-class things all virtually? Am I doing all the activities for these couple of days? Am I really relying a lot on digital tools? And sometimes it takes penciling it out on a scratch paper as you're coming up with your unit plan and just marking, how am I going to deliver this? And this comes out more when you're trying to design your flipped classroom experiences or you're working with other teachers. And if you're taking things from other people with their permission, of course, think about how that's porting literally in face time and in home time to the students. The other thing, and this just ties back to the why again, is when you're doing things, does it tie into the other objectives that you have in mind? Does it tie, and this is more just general ideology? Are you tying into actual assessments and objectives, or did you just wedge this in because you thought it was cool? And that's kind of where this is. It's a real fancy way, like I said, you can look at Fink's components of integrated course design, and we can talk about it. But just reminding you that there are separate portions that you need to cover. It's not just a bucket to fill up. So, that being said, what is tech good at? So there's a lot of stuff tech is really good at in the classroom. And of course, not all of these are in the class. I say in the class as in practice, teaching your students. And we have, using multimedia, for example. How many of you would think that teaching students about the Rough Riders, maybe I actually want to show them some of the Rough Riders? We have video footage from 1903 of Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. Now, we don't think about video clips as spanning that far back, but you'd be surprised. Now, of course, there's no sound. It's black and white, and if you teach the younger spectrum of students, or have people who do, you might get questions like, what was the world like when it was black and white? I kid you not, that actually happened. But you get these little clips. Oh, she's going to shout at me now. Oh, no, she won't. There's a woman's voice on all of these clips from the Library of Congress, and after a while, you'll get really used to it and running to silence it. But the best thing about these is 1903 video clips, you don't have to worry about copyright on that. Go forth and use. And your students then can go ahead and use this stuff as well. Does anybody know the benchmark right now for what year that pretty much you're safe after for copyrighted materials without having to do a lot of mental arithmetic? 1923 is the good one. Should be a little later, but we've had some interesting congressional issues. Imagine that. So you're through the early 20s, you don't have to worry about the copyright on all these because they are in public domain. The only thing you would have to worry about is sound recordings. We can talk about that later because, again, you can thank Congress and copyright law and our wonderful system for that. But then if you find some of this old stuff, you teach students more about where it's coming from than making sure that all of them are not misappropriating and going to get you locked up. Now, as that goes on, that turns into a good opportunity to teach about credibility and mashups and things, and we'll talk in a few about that. So we have all these multimedia opportunities. We have multimodal opportunities as well, using a lot of different types of materials. And you can collaborate with your students live, in the classroom, off-site, wherever, depending on what type of district and classroom setup you have. In this circumstance, think about Google. Let's say you don't have a smart board and you want to still do something with your students. You can use Google Sheets or something and come up with, hand out a couple of devices if you have that luxury. You can find other opportunities to supplement a live collaborative experience, but again, it's just improving. I could tape up some butcher paper on the wall. However, it's a lot easier now to share the snapshot of what the students did, come back to it later on, maybe use it as something for a unit development or for research prompts later on when it's in a digital format as opposed to rolling and folding up your butcher paper. You can also then fork it into a lot of different ways and students can take components of it. Also democratization, I know a fancy word that means that every student has a chance at this. Some of these tools like Kahoot have a timer, of course. Slower reaction students, socially anxious students are gonna not really succeed with that. But there are other tools that have an even playing field in that and still give everyone an opportunity to come out. One of the things that happens with online learning environments you'll find as students move on is that discussion boards and things where you think students wouldn't care, actually they really come up with better content because they have a chance to deliberately sit down and focus on something, and they don't have to worry as much about, oh, Timothy raised his hand again in the front and I didn't have an opportunity. I'm just not even going to try. So tech can help sometimes wedge in there, give students an opportunity to have a voice, to have a chance to think that normally you have to fight for that. We also have, like I said, kind of using tech for formative assessments and research prompts that you're doing already. Except in this case, you're creating an opportunity to have a record of that, to maybe split it apart, to have a Word document that students were firing off questions about something, or maybe a quiz that they took at the beginning, and you say, all right, you guys had some really great questions. We're only going to get to the first 10. That's our commitment for our unit. But these other 5 are really good. Who doesn't have a research prompt yet? Or who wants to, maybe for extra credit, go and research that one that everybody was asking, but we don't have time to go about? And there are techniques that can facilitate that sort of an environment. But again, you can keep a record of it. You can come back around. And you can also then put the onus on students to be the creators. So there are a lot of tools out there. I'm going to close some of this. There are tools like, has anybody heard of Night Lab? It sounds like a bad 80s sitcom, actually, like Knight Rider. But if you go down, there are these 4 right now storytelling tools that they have. Some of you probably have embraced the magic of Google Earth and Street View. I've used that plenty of times with students to go and look at change over time moments where I go and I say, okay, here's an old photo of a building from the 1880s. Now let's go look at it on Street View because we can't take a field trip to rural Massachusetts. And in this case, you have juxtapose, which it's that slider where you can look at the satellite images. But here's the best part. You actually don't have to do anything to do this. This one's the demo, so you can see what I'm talking about here. But all of these, where is it? Oh, make a juxtapose. So all of these are web-based. It's really cool. I told you I'd pivot off of the pedagogy thing and give you some stuff to play with. And this gives students an opportunity to tinker with this, to, in this case, give a visual supplement maybe to something they're doing. The other ones that they've got at Night Lab are fantastic. SoundSight has been used by a lot of different journalistic outlets that you want to put a quote from somebody, but you want to also put the recording on there. You can link directly to it. You have Story Map. I've seen people that they love doing the Lewis and Clark expedition on this one. This one's Manifest Destiny as well. But you can go along the route, and you have you see all these are different media things, tweets, videos, pictures, and it moves along. Students just do this online, and it moves with you. I think it'll show. Yeah. So you see, I can start to create this nice presentation all just web-based. Still, the students have to do the heavy lifting, of course, of researching the process. And they could do this on paper as a portfolio printed out or whatnot. But this is visually stunning, and it helps create a flow, and it helps move into something where students have ownership of it beyond just, I wrote another paper. The last one that's really cool on here is the timeline, which is the same thing, but linear based. There's also, for those of you who are web map fans and do any ancient history, nerds recently have really taken to mapping the Roman Empire and using Google Maps to do that. So if you're into that sort of stuff, the digital atlas of the Roman Empire is really cool. Figured I'd throw that one out there for you. All right. So students as creators as well. This is a perfect place for you to also talk with your students about credibility, fair use, about not only in how they analyze sources looking forward, but how they are creating sources themselves and how they are part of this larger process of understanding, digesting history. The papers they create are primary sources. So here, what is a primary source? We all say this. Somebody have a good answer. What a primary source is? I'll put you on the spot. First-hand document. We have other flavors, variations of this one?
Eyewitness.
Eyewitness. So a lot of times we think about their documents or text or whatever created at the time under study. So we talk a lot about the fact that if I'm studying about, in this picture, early computers, or the Air Force, or the Army Air Corps, I think. I don't remember what year this was. This would be one thing. If I'm studying about photography, the history of photography, I might use this source differently. And it depends on what I'm studying and how the source fits in to that analysis. Okay, and then we were talking about then selecting sources, looking at primary sources. There are a couple of really good tech online type things. One, the Rough Riders that I just pulled up. Everybody loves our Library of Congress. They actually just released a whole bunch of new Creator Suite type things so that you can tinker and I think they call it Labs, LOC Labs. It's on their main page now. Yes, Library of Congress Labs. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And the other big repository that you can look at online that I encourage you to tinker with is archive.org. Again, perfect opportunity to talk to your students about attribution, credibility, fair use, looking at where sources are coming from, what channels they're going to. Are they just typing the question into Google and grabbing the first thing? We all use Google Images, but how many of you realize that if you go to images.google.com, let's say I want a picture of Roosevelt, because why not? I can actually say, well, instead of grabbing the first one, or maybe even looking underneath and saying, well, this is coming from Wikipedia, so it must be okay. You can go to Tools, Usage Rights, and modify right there that you want ones that are for use, that you can talk to your students about how authors can label things for their own rights through like Creative Commons or the Wikimedia, about how we use and access sources online, and that not everything is a free-for-all just because it's out there. Just because you see a picture online doesn't mean you can't just take it. It may have restrictions with it. So, all right. So there's that one. There's a couple of other things I did want to mention. We were talking about AR and VR, and that's some really cool stuff. Smithsonian, if you deal with it, they've just updated this. Now you can actually go into, we talked about Apple. They don't, the new USB drives are all USB-C, so I have to keep running back and forth to push the thing around. We can look around the Apollo command module for Apollo 11. I can go through, and if I click on this, students, instead of looking at a picture of an artifact, and you can't get to the Smithsonian, and then your internet actually cooperates, I can now look at this bust and look around it and manipulate it and play with it. So now couple this with other technology that would allow you to, through Google, maybe use Google Cardboard or something that is only $20 a pop. And students are taking virtual field trips that cost you almost nothing that can help you supplement these experiences. And it makes it more real. That's part of the benefit of this. We can still look at these sources as photographs, but if I can also supplement that with a trip to Gettysburg on Google Earth, or maybe we go and we look at the Apollo 11 module when we're talking about it and say, hey, look, this is how small it was. Now that you can look around, these are just little moments that you can interject. All right. So, one other thing to keep in mind, though, when you're selecting sources, and this goes for technology as well, what do students already know? So especially with tech, am I going to have to teach them how to use this thing? Is it going to chew up a lot of time? Or is this something that everyone knows how to use? And then what standards and questions is it answering and addressing? Is this for fun? Is this going to fulfill a particular requirement inside your curriculum? And then finally, how am I using it? Am I using it to its best ability? Am I just trying to wedge it in there? We've talked about that now. I'll put this up. This is laundry list challenges. Half of you know this already. Look, not all of us have money. Not all of us have internet connections at home. Not all of us have one-to-one districts. So how do we get around that? How do we find opportunities to still give students technology engagement, whether it be, I don't know, opening up a little bit earlier in the morning. Maybe it's finding a way that I can bring something into the classroom. Maybe it's making sure that if I know that my students aren't going to be able to do X, that I don't build my assignment to set them up to fail because they can't get such and such to work at home. This also ties into Flash. Everybody remembers the news now that Flash is going to start to be not supported. So start fixing all your stuff now in your lesson plans if you're using Flash-enabled devices, because it's going to be a headache. Also remember that you can put a policy in place for your classroom to help students succeed. Whether that be actual tech usage policy. Yes, you're allowed to use your cell phones during this 2-minute break halfway through the class, but then it's no devices. Or yes, we're going to use devices in the classroom. I expect you to be engaged. Or no, put it in this bag and I'm going to throw it out the window. No, I'm kidding. But you can set a policy like that. It also helps you, though, kind of monitor your own usage. And then remember that tech isn't neutral as well. Tech, like in the first slide, sometimes it's designed to make you act a certain way. These devices have particular avenues of access, have particular designs to them that sometimes are good and the designers intend, and other times come about accidentally that maybe, like the Flash thing, Apple on iPhones, if you have students who want to look at a virtual tour and it's Flash enabled, they're not going to be able to do it on their devices because it's not supported. So thinking ahead about what are these little bumps that I might run around so that you don't have to just-in-time teach your way out of a glitch in your lesson. Teaching students, we've mentioned briefly also about avoiding one-stop shop. Tech has a habit of, I can type in here, when was the Hull House created? Got it. Finding other ways. And then the other challenge that I mentioned to a lot of people is literacy and credibility, which we've touched on before. Are you going to be the one responsible for carving out time? Are you going to work with a colleague? This is another benefit of tech, though. You get a chance to collaborate with your colleagues. You get a chance to share with people maybe in other departments and other districts that you never got a chance to play with before. There's a movement for open syllabi among certain teachers. Do you want to be a part of that? Sure, go for it. And then you start to reap the problems and benefits of those. But it opens your network, your tools as well. And it allows you also to find new ways to engage with your students. So the flipped classroom model, it allows you to be a presence in their lives, maybe over the weekend, on a holiday or something, get in touch with you if you want to go that far. I know some students really are into the texting thing if you're like in high school, or I don't know. But there are tools to help you even anonymously support them, or not anonymously, remotely support them in things that they may want to take on in their group projects. And you don't have to just cross your fingers and hope that it works out. Okay. So I'm going to send this along, so you don't have to copy all these down. But since you have to start your lists somewhere of things, there are a lot of different tools out there. And so I'm not going to pull up every single one of these. We played with some of them, but I want to talk about just real quick some of the themes here. So Kahoot, Jeopardy, we talk about quizzing. This is a really good way to look at using them, like I said, as formative assessments. Using them as ways to kind of keep brushed up. We like to gamify things a lot now, and so maybe you have challenges along the way to refresh previous concepts. And if they're good completion rates, you can count that as something. They have like habit streak programs and things you could even use. We have other creative suites, Pixlr, Canva, things where students don't have to own Photoshop. They don't have to own these big multimedia suites. they can just log on and use it without compromising credentials, and because we are the custodians of their privacy as well. The materials that we ask them to engage with, whether they're third party, whether they belong to the district, we have to be responsible as educators that we're not setting them up and asking them to be a part of something that could be really risky or dubious. So, are we being deliberate in our choices and doing a little bit of our homework as well? Do I really want to have them submit to this other site because it says it's not secure and it doesn't really look like it's been updated since like 2000? Screencast-O-Matic, QuickTime. A lot of people have QuickTime now. Good ways if you want to do a processes real quick. Show people a quick, let's say you wanted them to be prepared to do something with tech when they come in and they can show them on a screen. Pull up a screencast, record it, throw it on a lot of people have Google Classroom now, the Google Drive on there. You can create a little screencast folder or something. I have a lot of teachers that do that. They just have kind of a library for students to be able to go back to later on if they need a refresher. And we said then with Google Earth and Classroom and all these other. We've got Night Lab, Topic Graph, Workflowly, Draftback, Grammarly, all these for supplemental stuff that you deal with, like writing and rhetoric and things that might help students and cross a little bit of that disciplinary siloing that we tend to do. Maybe you work with your lesson with an English teacher so that you're studying similar things, or a science teacher, but you also want to be supportive then. So, or maybe you have some struggling students and you say, look, here's something I know about that might help you, and you can give it to them to use maybe at home or in the library. Live binders, Padlet, all these weird words that sound like they've lost 30 vowels along the way. For collecting, we like to say curating now, but let's say you want students to aggregate sources. It used to be you make a bibliography for your research project. Well, there's a lot of ways out there now too. Like I forgot to put on there, Mendeley for science research is a good one, but as an example of repositories online that also let you save your searches and come back and download them that aren't through your library databases. So students would be able to do this off-site. They'd be able to, keep combing at home for different things. And one of the really sketchy examples would be social media. Use it at your own risk, but sometimes it can be really powerful. I've had some instructors that or some teachers that would go through, and professors that use Twitter, but they use it as just an anonymous thing. They create a fake handle that everybody logs into, and they just create the threads there under 140. And, or you can use the Google Sheets, and people can all live collaborate on that as anonymous sources or anonymous profiles. So there are other ways where you can start to get live input with folks on things they're already familiar and comfortable with, so that barrier of the technology itself isn't there. Now you're engaging students with the content, not the device. And then Plickr is a cool one that I throw on there as well. If you're into QR codes, that's a way that students can do polling and stuff with, somebody at work stole mine for the week, so I couldn't bring it. That you can get little cardboard printouts, and the students hold them up, and you scan the room. You're the only one with a device, and you just scan it, and it live polls for you. You can print them off. That's pretty cool. If they want to change their answer, they just turn the card. That's pretty neat. You can buy the fancy set, which is laminated and all online. So if that's what my coworker decided to pilfer from me. I also, because I'm going to be putting this on, here's a good dump of stuff, different types of sources. But one I want to show you too, we talk a lot about visual. We talk a lot about manipulating and all, but don't forget sound. Poor old sound gets a bad rap. I did a project recently. I talked about the one with using old-time radio. There are other ones out there we did with Civil War sheet music, and then we would find recordings of the songs and talk about the different sides and what their music had to say, what the tone was. Did they pilfer off of each other from the same tune? Yes. And then they pilfered off the British because a lot of them were just drinking songs. This was a really neat project as well from USC, and it's a soundscape of 1920s New York. So when we talk about students being in a place, we like to think about what it looked like, what was the social structure like. Well, if I go to ancient Rome, that place reeked. It was noisy. It was, there were all these other factors. We look at the tenement housing in New York and we say, oh, look at the conditions, look at that. But if you were there, what smells, what sounds, what other senses can you engage along the way here? So actually, if I go to space, I think I set it up right. So I can listen, I can read. I think I accidentally turned the sound off of this because it was really loud earlier. Let's see if I can get it back here. Let's see here. Maybe. It takes a minute to load. But this would be a good opportunity for students also then to think about the environments in which they live and how do all these other things, yeah, you can kind of hear it. Children playing. I can listen to the Coney Island beach crowd if I want to. Sometimes watch a video clip along with it. So these are all, I'm not just having this as an excuse to show them old footage. I could actually talk about urban life. I can talk about a lot of history through the mid-19th century has video, audio, text. People still behave the same on film now as people ham up for the camera. So keep that in mind. Broaden your play set a little bit. Okay. And with that, one final thing. We all run into problems. I love XKCD. This was actually today's. The law is that you will always have cables that don't work. And so be prepared for problems, be prepared for issues, have backup plans when you're using tech. And that kind of goes with that analog component as well. So with that, like I said, really, really big buffet. A lot of stuff to ponder, a lot of stuff to think about, but also hopefully a lot of stuff to spring off of. And to not try to lock yourself into, oh, there was that one thing, so I'm just going to use that. We don't just use one primary source. We corroborate with other sources. So if you're going to dive in deep. See what you can drag up. And see what students can create now, too, because they're a lot more savvy at this stuff than you think they are, and a lot more patient with it than you think they are. So email me if you want to know more about some of the stuff that I've talked about or want to keep having a conversation. Trust me, I have pages and pages of this stuff saved up because I do this all the time. I help people out, connect them to different resources. And that way I'm kind of like a librarian. I'm helping you on your research along the way. And so I will send this presentation along, but there's my contact. So we got a couple minutes left. Any questions, comments, ire, hatred? Yeah?
So I was looking at the vector site that you just had.
Yeah.
I pulled it up. So they've got things listed that say they have no files, or are they hoping to find more?
Yeah, some of them I know used to be there and then are I know some of them I've looked at and they've been taken down to either be rebuilt or they've been updating this site as well for the back end. So that's just an unfortunate, like I said, with the Flash and everything, it's a weird transition point. Again, rule check everything earlier. I probably should have looked, but I know they're still growing this. Yeah, I know this project, and I know that there's one, it's called the 78 project through archive.org that's all digitizing historic 78s and looking at the vinyl records and putting those in historic context as well because of just the snippet in time that those are. But I know that that's one of those funding and hosting and all it's a slow march. So, others? Okay, well, let me know if you need anything else. Otherwise, thank you all, and I'm on time, actually, for once. So, there we go. Thanks.
Right there. If you got a green light, you're on.
All right.
If it's green, it's on.